The summer of 1887 brought drought to the high desert country of Arizona Territory, but it also brought Running Wolf to my doorstep with words that would change both our lives forever. I had been working my small ranch in the shadow of the Chiricahua Mountains for 3 years, surviving on stubborn determination and the occasional kindness of neighbors who saw past my eastern ways to the man I was trying to become. Running Wolf stood 6 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of 2 worlds, the Apache way his grandmother taught him and the white man's way the reservation demanded. His English came slow and careful, each word chosen like he was picking stones to build something important. When he spoke that morning, standing in the shade of my ramshackle porch, his words hit me like water hitting dry earth. "I wish for love," he said, looking out toward the mountains where his people once roamed free. "But I do not know the white man's way of finding it." I set down my coffee cup and studied his face. Running Wolf had been my neighbor for 2 years, helping me dig wells and mend fences, teaching me which plants could heal and which could kill. In all that time, he had never asked me for anything except the chance to work for fair wages and honest treatment. Now here he was, trusting me with something deeper than need. He was sharing hope. The story he told me that morning painted a picture of a man caught between 2 ways of being. In the Apache tradition, a man proved his worth through deeds, hunting, fighting, protecting his people. But those days had ended with Geronimo's surrender. Now Running Wolf worked as a translator at the agency office in town, wearing white man's clothes and speaking white man's words to help his people navigate a world that seemed designed to grind them down. He had seen Sarah McKenna at the general store for months, he told me. She worked there for her father, a man who had come west after the war to build something new from the ashes of what he had lost. Sarah had honey-colored hair that caught sunlight like captured gold and eyes green as spring grass after rain. More than her beauty, though, Running Wolf was drawn to her kindness. He had watched her slip extra flour into the sacks of families who could not pay, had seen her gentle patience with the Apache women who came to trade beadwork for supplies. "She looks at me," Running Wolf said, his voice carrying the weight of careful observation. "Not like I am Apache. Not like I am white man. Like I am just man. But I do not know how to speak to her. In my grandfather's time, if a warrior wanted a woman, he brought horses to her father. He proved his strength, his ability to provide. What can I bring to white woman? What strength do I have in white man's world?" I leaned back in my chair and thought about that question. Running Wolf was one of the strongest men I knew, but strength came in different forms. The white world measured a man by his property, his position, his ability to accumulate things. The Apache world measured a man by his courage, his wisdom, his connection to the land and his people. Running Wolf was wealthy in the old ways but poor in the new ones, at least by the standards most folks used. But I had learned something in my years in the territory that most Eastern folks never understood. The strongest people were those who could build bridges between different worlds, who could honor the old ways while adapting to new ones. Running Wolf had that strength, even if he could not see it himself. "You want to know what you can bring her?" I asked. "You can bring yourself. Not the Apache warrior your grandfather was, not the white man the agency wants you to be, but the man you are, someone who belongs to both worlds and can walk in either one." Running Wolf's expression remained serious, but I caught something shifting in his eyes, not quite hope yet, but the shadow of possibility. "White people court different than Apache," I continued. "It is not about proving strength through horses or hunting. It is about proving character through attention, through small kindnesses, through showing a woman that you see her as more than just someone to marry but as someone to build a life with." Over the next hour, I explained the peculiar dance of white courtship, how a man might tip his hat and speak politely, how he might offer to carry packages or escort a lady to church social events. How he might bring small gifts, not as payment or proof of wealth, but as tokens of his attention and regard. "But, most important," I told him, "is that you listen to her. White women, especially ones like Sarah who work beside their fathers and see how hard life can be, they want partners, not masters. They want men who will build something with them, not for them." Running Wolf absorbed this information with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. He asked questions about timing, about appropriate behavior, about how to judge whether his attention was welcome or unwanted. His question showed me that he understood something many white men missed, that true strength sometimes meant holding back, that real courage might mean accepting rejection gracefully. "There is something else you must understand," I said finally. "Sarah's father will not make this easy. Daniel McKenna is a good man, but he came west carrying the weight of everything he lost back east. He sees danger everywhere, especially when it comes to his daughter. He will not look at you and see the man I know, he will see Apache, and all the fear that word carries for white folks." Running Wolf nodded slowly. This was not news to him. Every Apache who dealt with white people carried the burden of other men's fears and other men's hate. "Then, I must show him different truth," Running Wolf said. "Must show him that Apache man can be good man for white woman. Must show him that love is stronger than fear." That afternoon, Running Wolf and I rode into town together. The dusty main street of Tucson hummed with the usual activity: freight wagons kicking up clouds of dust, cowboys fresh from the range looking for whiskey and trouble, Mexican vaqueros heading home with their day's pay, Chinese merchants arranging their goods. In the middle of it all stood McKenna's General Store, its painted sign promising fair prices and honest dealing. Through the window, we could see Sarah arranging bolts of fabric, her movements efficient and graceful. Her father worked behind the counter, his gray beard neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp and assessing as he dealt with customers. "What do I do now?" Running Wolf asked. "Now you do what every nervous man has done since time began," I said. "You walk in there and buy something you do not need while working up the courage to say hello." Running Wolf purchased a sack of flour he did not need and a tin of tobacco he did not smoke. Sarah served him with professional politeness, but I caught the way her eyes lingered on his face, saw the slight smile that touched her lips when he carefully counted out his coins. When he thanked her and tipped his hat, she actually blushed. Daniel McKenna watched the entire exchange with the suspicious attention of a man who had learned not to trust easy answers. When Running Wolf left, McKenna's eyes followed him through the window. "That Indian's been coming in here more often lately," McKenna said to his daughter. "His name is Running Wolf," Sarah replied, her voice carrying a note of gentle correction. "And he always pays fairly and speaks respectfully." "That's not the point, Sarah." "Then, what is the point, father?" McKenna did not answer right away. Outside, Running Wolf untied his horse and swung into the saddle with fluid grace. Even performing such a simple action, he moved like a man at home in his body, confident in his abilities. "The point," McKenna said finally, "is that some things are just not meant to be." That evening, Running Wolf and I sat on my porch watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of gold and red. The drought had turned the landscape hard and brown, but the sunset made even the dying grass look beautiful. "She smiled at me," Running Wolf said. I noticed. Her father did not smile. I noticed that too. Running Wolf was quiet for a long time, considering the implications. In the Apache way, a father's approval was crucial, but it was not everything. A woman had some say in choosing her husband, especially if she was strong enough to speak her mind. But, in the white world, a father's opposition could make courtship nearly impossible. "Tell me about Daniel McKenna," Running Wolf said. "Tell me what kind of man he is." I had heard McKenna's story in pieces, the way you learn about people in small towns where gossip travels faster than telegraph messages. He had been a shopkeeper in Pennsylvania before the war, a man with a wife and young daughter and plans for a peaceful life. The war had taken him away for 3 years, and, when he came back, he found his wife had died of fever and his business had failed. He had brought 8-year-old Sarah west with nothing but determination and the last of his savings. For 10 years, they had built their store together, surviving Apache raids, drought, economic panics, and the thousand small disasters that claimed so many who tried to tame the territory. "He is a man who has lost much," I told Running Wolf. "And, now his daughter is all he has left. He will not give her up easily, especially not to someone he sees as dangerous." "Am I dangerous?" I looked at my friend, this man who had taught me to read the desert's moods, who had shared his knowledge freely and asked for nothing but fairness in return. "Dangerous? Perhaps, but not in the way McKenna feared." "You are dangerous to his plans," I said. "He probably hopes Sarah will marry some nice white man who will take over the store and give him grandchildren who look like him. You represent the unknown, the unfamiliar." That frightens him. And what frightens her? That was a more interesting question. From what I had observed, Sarah McKenna was not easily frightened. She had grown up in a land where danger was commonplace, where Apache raids and Mexican bandits and natural disasters were simply part of life. She had learned to shoot, to ride, to keep accounts, to judge character quickly and accurately. If she was afraid of anything, it was probably of being trapped in a small life with a small man. I think she is afraid of being ordinary, I said. I think she wants something more than just marriage and children and growing old behind a store counter. You represent adventure, the unknown, the chance to build something new instead of just maintaining something old. Running Wolf considered this. Then, I must show her that loving me would not mean giving up safety for danger, but giving up small life for big life. The next morning brought news that would test all our plans. A rider came into town with word that Apache raiders had hit a ranch 30 miles south, running off cattle and burning buildings. The territorial government immediately issued warnings about Apache threats, and the army increased patrols. Within hours, the mood in town had shifted from casual wariness to active suspicion. White folks who had been merely polite to the Apache families living on the reservation now crossed the street to avoid them. The atmosphere grew thick with fear and accusation. Running Wolf felt the change immediately. When he went to the agency office that morning, he found a crowd of white men waiting for him, their faces hard with anger and suspicion. "Where were you last night, Indian?" demanded Tom Bradley, a rancher whose spread bordered the reservation. "I was at home," Running Wolf replied calmly. "Can anyone prove that?" "I can," I said, stepping out of the crowd. "Running Wolf was at my place until nearly midnight, helping me repair a windmill that broke yesterday." Bradley's eyes narrowed as he looked at me. "You're mighty quick to vouch for him, Williams. Makes a man wonder where your loyalties lie." "My loyalties lie with the truth," I said. "And the truth is that Running Wolf had nothing to do with any raids." The crowd muttered and shifted, but they had no real evidence, only suspicion and fear. Eventually they dispersed, but the damage was done. The fragile trust that had been building between Running Wolf and the white community had cracked. That afternoon, when Running Wolf went to McKenna's store, he found the door locked and a sign saying closed for inventory. Through the window, he could see Sarah inside, but when she saw him, she turned away. "It is beginning," Running Wolf said when he found me at the livery stable. "They will blame all Apache for what some Apache did. Soon they will say I am dangerous, that Sarah is not safe with me." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe this is the time when you prove who you really are." That evening, we learned more about the raid. It had been the work of a small band of young Apache men who had left the reservation without permission, led by a warrior named Broken Tooth who refused to accept the new ways. They had not killed anyone, but they had taken horses and cattle, and they had left behind enough sign to make tracking possible. "The army will catch them," Running Wolf said. "And then they will punish all Apache for what these few have done. They will use this as excuse to make life harder on the reservation, to take away more freedoms." "Unless someone stops them first," I said. Running Wolf looked at me sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean that maybe it is time for you to show this town what kind of man you really are. Maybe it is time to prove that you belong to both worlds, that you can be Apache enough to find these raiders and white enough to bring them to justice." The idea was dangerous, possibly suicidal. If Running Wolf went after the raiders alone, he might be killed by them for being a traitor to his people. If he brought them back, he might be accused by whites of being in league with them. But if he did nothing, the raiders would continue to make life harder for all Apache, and his chance with Sarah would disappear under a wave of fear and suspicion. "The army will never catch them," Running Wolf said slowly. "They do not know the land, do not understand Apache ways of hiding. But I know Broken Tooth. I know where he will go, what he will do. And if you bring him back? What then? Then, I show both peoples that there is another way. That Apache man can serve justice, not just for Apache people but for all people. That love can be stronger than fear, that trust can be stronger than hate." It was a beautiful idea, but beautiful ideas had a way of dying ugly deaths in the Arizona Territory. Still, as I looked at my friend's face in the firelight, I saw something there that I had seen before in the faces of men who were about to attempt the impossible. I saw the kind of quiet determination that moves mountains and changes the course of rivers. "I will need help," Running Wolf said. "What kind of help?" "I will need someone to watch over Sarah while I am gone. Someone to make sure the white people do not let their fear turn to something worse. Someone to speak for me if I do not come back." "And if you do come back?" Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "If I come back with Broken Tooth and his men, then I will have proven something to this town. I will have shown them that Running Wolf is not just Apache, not just white man's helper, but man who chooses justice over tribe, peace over war. Maybe then, Daniel McKenna will see that his daughter would be safe with me. Maybe then, Sarah will see that loving me would not mean giving up her world, but making it bigger." The next morning, Running Wolf came to my place before dawn. He was dressed for travel, carrying his rifle and a small pack of supplies. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who had made his decision and would not be turned from it. "How will you find them?" I asked. "Broken Tooth is proud. He will not hide like rabbit in hole. He will make camp somewhere with good water and good view, somewhere he can see enemy coming. I know 3 places he might choose. I will check all 3. And, when you find him? Then, I will talk to him first, try to make him understand that this path leads only to death for all Apache. If talk fails." Running Wolf touched the rifle on his shoulder. "Then, I will do what must be done." I watched him ride out into the gray dawnlight, sitting his horse like he was part of it, moving across the desert landscape like a shadow. Part of me wondered if I would ever see him alive again. Part of me wondered if I was watching the bravest man I knew ride toward his death. But, mostly I thought about what he had said about love being stronger than fear. In a land where fear seemed to grow like weeds after rain, where suspicion poisoned wells and hatred burned bridges, maybe what the territory needed most was someone willing to prove that another way was possible. 2 days passed with no word. In town, tension grew like heat shimmers rising from sun-baked ground. The army patrols returned empty-handed, unable to find any trace of the raiders. Rumors spread that more ranches had been hit, that the Apache were planning a general uprising, that no white person was safe outside the town limits. At McKenna's store, I found Sarah working alone, her father having gone to a meeting of concerned citizens at the saloon. She looked tired, worried, older than her 20 years. "Any word about Running Wolf?" she asked when she saw me. "Not yet. But he knows what he's doing." "Does he?" Sarah's voice carried a note of frustration. "Everyone in town is saying he's probably joined up with the raiders, that he's gone back to the savage ways. They're saying any Apache who stays in town is a spy, a threat." "And what do you say?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, folding and refolding a piece of calico. "I say Running Wolf is the most honorable man I've ever met. I say he speaks to me like I have a mind, asks my opinions about things, treats me like a person instead of just a pretty thing to be protected. I say if more men were like him, this would be a better world." "Have you told your father that?" "I tried. He says I'm too young to understand the dangers, that I'm letting romantic notions cloud my judgment. He says Running Wolf might be a good Apache, but that doesn't make him a good husband for a white woman." "And what do you think makes a good husband?" Sarah's smile was sad but determined. "I think a good husband is a man who sees you clearly and loves what he sees. A man who wants to build something with you, not just protect you or provide for you. A man who has the courage to be himself even when the world tells him to be something else." That evening, as I was heading back to my ranch, I saw dust on the southern horizon. 3 riders were approaching town, moving at a steady pace. As they drew closer, I could see that the lead rider was Running Wolf, and behind him rode 2 Apache men with their hands bound. Word spread through town like wildfire. By the time Running Wolf reached the sheriff's office, a crowd had gathered. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion, a few showed something that might have been respect. Sheriff Martinez came out to meet them, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "What have you got there, Running Wolf?" "Broken Tooth and his nephew, Yellow Horse." They are the ones who raided the Morrison place. The others scattered when I found them. These two chose to fight rather than run. They're hurt, the sheriff observed, noting the blood-stained bandages on both prisoners. They fought well, Running Wolf said simply. I fought better. The crowd murmured at this admission. In their minds, the story was writing itself. Lone Apache tracker hunts down renegades, risks his life to bring them to justice. It was the kind of tale that newspapers loved, the kind that made heroes out of men who had been outcasts the day before. But Sheriff Martinez was a careful man who had seen too many situations turn ugly. Why should we believe you didn't just arrange this whole thing? Maybe you helped them raid Morrison, then brought them in when things got too hot. Before Running Wolf could answer, a new voice cut through the crowd. Because I can vouch for him. Everyone turned to see Daniel McKenna pushing through the gathered people, his face grim but determined. Running Wolf was in my store the afternoon before the raid, buying supplies. He mentioned he was worried about young Apache men leaving the reservation, said he thought they were headed for trouble. I didn't pay much attention at the time, but now it makes sense. The sheriff looked at McKenna with surprise. You're vouching for him, Daniel? That's not like you. No, it's not, McKenna admitted. But my daughter has been asking me some hard questions these past few days, making me think about things I'd rather not think about. She asked me what the difference was between judging a man by his actions and judging him by his blood. I couldn't give her a good answer. McKenna looked directly at Running Wolf for the first time since the crowd had gathered. What you did took courage. You risked your life to protect people who don't trust you, who probably never will trust you completely. That says something about your character. It says I chose to be bridge instead of wall, Running Wolf replied. It says I chose peace over war, even when war might have been easier. Later that evening, after Broken Tooth and Yellow Horse had been locked up and the crowd had dispersed, I found Running Wolf sitting on the porch of the boarding house where he kept a room. He looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that comes not just from physical exertion but from the weight of having made life and death choices. How did it happen? I asked. Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the stars. I found them at Skull Canyon, like I thought I would. They had good camp, good water, good view. But they were not watching carefully enough. I got close before they saw me. And then, I tried to talk to them. I told Broken Tooth that raiding would only bring soldiers, would make life harder for all Apache. I told him the old ways were dead, that we had to find new ways to be men, new ways to protect our people. What did he say? He said I was no longer Apache, that I had become white man's dog. He said he would rather die as warrior than live as slave. Yellow Horse agreed with his uncle, they both chose to fight. You could have killed them. Yes. It would have been easier. But dead men cannot change their minds, cannot learn new ways. I hoped that if I defeated them without killing them, they might understand that there was strength in the new ways too. Did they? Running Wolf's smile was sad but hopeful. Broken Tooth said something to me as I was binding his wounds. He said I fought like Apache warrior but fought like white man. He said maybe that made me something new, something that could survive in this changing world. I think that was his way of saying he understood. 3 days later, the territorial judge arrived to deal with Broken Tooth and Yellow Horse. The trial was swift but fair. Both men pleaded guilty to theft and destruction of property in exchange for sentences of 5 years of hard labor instead of hanging. Before he was taken away, Broken Tooth sought out Running Wolf. You were right about the new ways, he said in Apache. A man who can walk in two worlds is stronger than a man who knows only one. Take care of our people. Show them how to be strong in white man's world without forgetting who they are. The trial had another unexpected consequence. News of Running Wolf's capture of the raiders spread throughout the territory, carried by newspapers and telegraph messages. Suddenly, he was not just another Apache trying to make his way in the white world, he was the Apache who had risked his life to protect white settlers, who had chosen law over tribal loyalty. Job offers came from as far away as Tucson and Phoenix, positions with the territorial government, with shipping companies, with mining operations. All of them offered good money, steady work, and the kind of respect that had been denied to him before. But Running Wolf was not interested in leaving. His life was here, his roots were here, and, most importantly, his heart was here. It was Sarah who came to him first, 2 weeks after the trial. She found him at my place, where he was helping me repair storm damage to the barn. She rode up alone, sitting her horse with the kind of casual competence that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. "Miss McKenna," Running Wolf said, touching his hat brim. "Is everything all right? Is your father well?" "My father is fine," Sarah said, dismounting gracefully. "I came to talk to you, not about him but about us." "Us? Don't pretend you don't know what I mean, Running Wolf. The whole town knows you've been courting me in your careful, respectful way. The whole town also knows my father has been doing everything he can to discourage you." Running Wolf set down his hammer and gave Sarah his full attention. "Your father is a good man who wants to protect his daughter. I understand his concerns. Do you? Because I'm not sure I do anymore." Sarah's voice carried a note of frustration that suggested this was not an easy conversation for her. "He keeps talking about the dangers, about how different we are, about how it could never work. But he never talks about what you and I want, about what we think is possible." "And what do you think is possible?" Sarah stepped closer, her green eyes serious and determined. "I think love is possible. I think partnership is possible. I think two people who respect each other and share the same values can build a good life together, regardless of where they come from or what blood runs in their veins." "And your father?" "My father will have to learn to accept it, or he'll lose his daughter." Sarah's voice was firm, but I could hear the pain underneath. "I love him, but I won't let his fears rule my life. I've seen what you did, Running Wolf. I've seen how you chose justice over easy answers, how you risked everything to do what was right. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of man you are." Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what she was saying. When he spoke, his voice was careful, thoughtful. "I love you, Sarah McKenna. I have loved you since first day I saw you treat old Apache woman with kindness when other white people turned away. I love your strength, your intelligence, your courage. I love the way you see people clearly, without the shadows that fear puts over most people's eyes. But loving you means wanting what is best for you, not just what I want for myself. If marrying me would mean losing your father, losing your place in white community, would that be best for you?" Sarah's smile was radiant and determined. "Marrying you would mean gaining a partner who sees me as an equal, who wants to build something new and good in this hard land. Marrying you would mean children who belong to both worlds, who can help build bridges between peoples. Marrying you would mean a life of purpose instead of just security." That afternoon, Sarah and Running Wolf rode into town together, causing quite a stir among the citizens of the territory. They went directly to McKenna's general store, where Daniel McKenna was helping a customer select fabric for a dress. "Father," Sarah said, "I need to speak with you." McKenna's eyes took in the sight of his daughter and Running Wolf standing together, and I could see him trying to read the situation. "Sarah, we've talked about this." "No, Father, you've talked about this. I've listened. Now it's time for me to talk and for you to listen." What followed was one of the most remarkable conversations I had ever witnessed. Sarah spoke with the passion of a woman who had found her purpose, explaining to her father that she loved Running Wolf not despite his heritage but because of the man his heritage had helped him become. She talked about strength and courage and the kind of partnership that could weather any storm. Running Wolf spoke too, but his words were directed not to Sarah but to her father. He talked about his plans, his hopes, his understanding of the responsibilities that came with loving a white woman in a land where such love was dangerous. He offered to sign papers giving Daniel McKenna a say in any property he might acquire, promised to raise any children in the Christian faith if that was what Sarah wanted, pledged to protect and provide for Sarah according to both Apache and white customs. But, most importantly, he spoke about love not as passion or romance, but as commitment, as the choice to build something larger than oneself. "I cannot promise that our path will be easy," Running Wolf said finally. "This land is hard, and people's hearts can be harder. There will be those who will never accept us, who will always see danger where we see hope. But I can promise that I will love your daughter with everything I have, that I will honor her and protect her and work beside her to build something good." Daniel McKenna listened to all of this in silence, his face revealing nothing of what he was thinking. When both young people had finished speaking, he walked to the window and stood looking out at the dusty street, at the territory he had helped to tame. "I came here with nothing," he said finally. "Nothing but Sarah and the determination to build something better than what I had lost. For 10 years, we've worked together to build this store, this life. I suppose I always assumed she would marry someone who would fit into what we had already built, someone who would help maintain what we had created." He turned back to face them. "But maybe that was small thinking. Maybe what this land needs is not just maintaining the old ways but creating new ones. Maybe what Sarah needs is not just security but the chance to build something that has never been built before." McKenna looked directly at Running Wolf. "You saved this town from a war that was brewing. You chose justice over blood, peace over revenge. That takes a kind of strength I'm not sure I would have had at your age." "Does that mean," Sarah began? "That means I won't stand in your way," her father said. "But I won't pretend this will be easy, either for you or for this community. There will be talk, some of it ugly. There will be people who will never accept you as a couple. You'll have to be stronger than most married folks, more committed, more determined." "We understand," Running Wolf said. "Do you? Do you understand that your children will be caught between worlds, that they'll face challenges neither of you has faced? Do you understand that every decision you make will be watched and judged by people looking for you to fail?" Sarah reached for Running Wolf's hand. "We understand that we'll face those challenges together. We understand that love without courage is just sentiment, but love with courage can change the world." That evening, there was a celebration at my place. It was a small gathering. Sarah and Running Wolf, Daniel McKenna, Sheriff Martinez and his wife, a few other folks who had come to respect Running Wolf's character. We shared food and stories and plans for a future that none of us could have imagined a few months before. As the evening wound down and people began heading home, I found myself alone with Running Wolf on the porch. The desert air was cool and clean, full of the promise of rain. "You did it," I said. "Did what?" "Found love. Proved yourself. Became the bridge you talked about." Running Wolf was quiet for a moment, considering this. "I think maybe I proved something else too. I proved that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. When I chose to go after Broken Tooth, when I chose justice over the easy path, I killed the part of me that was afraid. The part that wanted to be safe more than it wanted to be right. And now I know who I am. Not Apache who tries to be white man, not white man who pretends to understand Apache ways. I am Running Wolf who chooses to build bridges instead of walls, who chooses love instead of fear, who chooses to create something new instead of just preserving something old." The wedding took place 6 months later, in the spring of 1888. It was held in the small church that served the growing community, officiated by the circuit preacher who rode through once a month. The ceremony blended Apache and white traditions. Running Wolf wore both his grandfather's medicine bundle and a suit ordered from San Francisco, while Sarah carried wildflowers gathered from the desert and wore her mother's pearls. Not everyone in town approved, but most came to the wedding anyway, drawn by curiosity if not by support. By then, Running Wolf had established himself as a successful businessman, using his knowledge of both cultures to facilitate trade between the reservation and white settlements. He had also become something of a local legend, the Apache who chose law over blood, who proved that courage and justice were stronger than fear and hatred. The couple settled on a small ranch just outside town, where they raised cattle and horses and, eventually, 3 children who grew up speaking both English and Apache, who learned to read both the white man's books and the desert's ancient signs. The children faced the challenges their grandfather had predicted, but they also inherited the strength their parents had shown, the strength that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let others define you. As for Daniel McKenna, he lived long enough to see his grandchildren graduate from the territorial school and to see his son-in-law elected to the territorial council. He lived long enough to understand that sometimes the greatest gift a father can give his child is not protection from the unknown, but the courage to embrace it. The story of Running Wolf and Sarah became part of the territory's folklore, told and retold around campfires and in saloons, changed and embellished with each telling. But those of us who knew them, who witnessed their courtship and their courage, knew the real truth of their story. It was not a story about an Apache who became white or a white woman who became Apache. It was a story about two people who chose to create something new, something that honored both their heritages while transcending the limitations of either. It was a story about the kind of love that builds bridges instead of walls, that chooses hope over fear, that insists on the possibility of a better world even when the current world offers little evidence to support such faith. Most importantly, it was a story about the truth that Running Wolf discovered in his quest for love, that the man who destroys his weak self, his fearful, small, defensive self, can never be destroyed by others. Such a man becomes like the desert itself, hard when he needs to be hard, but also capable of sudden beauty when the conditions are right. Such a man becomes like love itself, stronger than hate, more enduring than fear, and capable of transforming everything it touches. In the end, that was what the people of the territory learned from watching Running Wolf and Sarah build their life together. They learned that strength comes not from holding on to the familiar, but from having the courage to create something new. They learned that love, real love, is not about finding someone who fits into your existing world, but about finding someone with whom you can build a better world. And, perhaps most importantly, they learned that in a land where survival often seemed to depend on division and suspicion, the greatest strength might come from those brave enough to choose connection over separation, understanding over ignorance, and hope over fear. The first year of marriage tested Running Wolf and Sarah in ways that their courtship had only hinted at. Love, they discovered, was indeed the foundation, but building a life required more than love. It required the daily choice to honor that love through action, through compromise, through the thousand small decisions that either strengthen or weaken the bonds between two people. Their ranch, modest though it was, became a symbol of something new in the territory. White travelers would stop and stare in amazement at the sight of an Apache man and white woman working side by side, building something together. Some visitors came with suspicion, others with curiosity, and a few with genuine respect for what they were attempting. Running Wolf had purchased the land with money saved from his work as a translator and tracker, but it was Sarah's business sense that turned their small spread into a profitable operation. She kept the books, managed the correspondence with buyers, and negotiated prices with a shrewdness that impressed even the most hardened cattle dealers. "She's got more business sense than half the men in the territory," one buyer told Daniel McKenna. "Apache husband or not, that daughter of yours knows how to drive a bargain." The comment pleased McKenna more than he expected. In the months since the wedding, he had watched his daughter bloom in ways he had never anticipated. Marriage had not diminished Sarah's independence or strength. If anything, it had given her new outlets for both. She spoke her mind at town meetings, organized charity drives for struggling families, and gradually became one of the most respected voices in the small but growing community. Running Wolf, meanwhile, found himself walking a careful line between two worlds that sometimes seemed determined to remain separate. His success as a rancher and businessman earned him grudging respect from white neighbors, but some Apache on the reservation viewed his prosperity with suspicion, seeing it as evidence that he had abandoned his people for the benefits of white acceptance. The tension came to a head during the second year of their marriage, when drought struck the territory with devastating force. The Rio Grande ran low, wells went dry, and cattle began dying in pastures that turned to dust. Families that had struggled to make a living in good times found themselves facing starvation. It was Sarah who proposed the solution that would define their place in the community for years to come. "We have good water," she told Running Wolf as they watched their neighbors' cattle dying of thirst. "Our well is deep, and the spring in the north pasture is still flowing. We could open our land to other ranchers, let them water their herds here." "For a price?" "For free," Sarah said firmly. "When people are dying, you don't profit from their misery. You help because help is needed." Running Wolf studied his wife's face, seeing there the same determination that had driven her to choose love over safety, partnership over convention. "Your father would say that is bad business." "My father would be wrong. This is exactly the right business for the kind of people we want to be." For 3 months, their ranch became a gathering point for desperate families from across the territory. Apache from the reservation brought their horses, white ranchers drove their cattle, Mexican vaqueros led their stock, all coming to the one place where water still flowed freely and where they were all welcomed equally. The experience taught Running Wolf and Sarah things about leadership they had never expected to learn. They found themselves mediating disputes between groups that had been enemies, negotiating agreements between people who spoke different languages and followed different customs. Most importantly, they discovered that their ranch could be more than just a place where an Apache man and white woman lived together. It could be a place where the artificial divisions that plagued the territory began to break down. "You see that?" Running Wolf said to Sarah one evening as they watched Apache children playing with Mexican and white children by the water tank. "You see how easy it is when people are just trying to survive together instead of trying to survive against each other?" "I see it," Sarah replied. "And I see something else too. I see that this is what we're really building here, not just a ranch or a marriage, but a different way for people to live together." The drought eventually broke, but the relationships forged during those desperate months endured. Neighbors who had previously viewed Running Wolf with suspicion now sought his advice on water management and land use. Apache families who had questioned his loyalty now understood that success in the white world did not require abandoning Apache values, it could be a way of serving those values more effectively. The third year brought a different kind of test when Sarah announced she was expecting their first child. The pregnancy was difficult, made more challenging by the isolation of ranch life and the lack of experienced medical help. The nearest doctor was in Tucson, 2 days right away, and the midwife who served the local community was known more for her willingness to help than for her skill. It was Running Wolf's grandmother, a woman named Singing Bird who had lived through the transition from the old ways to the new, who provided the knowledge and experience that saw Sarah safely through childbirth. Singing Bird spoke little English, but her hands were gentle and, sure, her understanding of birth and healing deeper than any book-learned doctor's. When their son was born on a cool morning in October 1889, he came into the world attended by both an Apache grandmother's wisdom and a white woman's determination. They named him Thomas Wolfe McKenna, honoring both sides of his heritage, giving him names that would allow him to move freely in either world. "He looks like Running Wolf," Sarah said as she held the baby for the first time. "He looks like himself," Singing Bird corrected in her careful English. "He looks like new thing, not Apache, not white, but something that is both and more." The birth of their son marked a turning point in how the community viewed their family. Children, it seemed, had a way of making abstract questions concrete, of transforming philosophical debates about intermarriage into practical concerns about schooling, citizenship, and belonging. Some families remained hostile, unwilling to accept a child of mixed heritage as truly part of the community. But many others found their attitudes softening when confronted with a real baby who gurgled and smiled and needed the same care as any other child. "Blood is blood," said Mrs. Martinez, the sheriff's wife, when she came to visit the new mother. "This baby is as American as any child born in this territory. Maybe more American, since he represents what this country is supposed to be about: different peoples coming together to build something new." Running Wolf watched these interactions with fascination and growing understanding. He was seeing something he had never expected to see: the power of simple human connection to overcome even the deepest prejudices. His son would face challenges that neither he nor Sarah had faced, but he would also have opportunities they had never had: the opportunity to be accepted simply as himself, rather than as an Apache trying to fit into a white world or a white person trying to understand Apache ways. The fourth year tested their commitment to their vision when conflict erupted on the reservation. A new Indian agent, a man named Harrison who believed that the only good Indian was one who completely abandoned his traditional ways, instituted harsh policies designed to force rapid assimilation. Children were forbidden to speak Apache on the reservation school grounds. Traditional religious practices were banned. Adults were required to cut their hair and abandon traditional dress. Those who resisted faced imprisonment or reduction of food rations. The policies created a crisis of conscience for Running Wolf. He had chosen to bridge two worlds, but bridging required that both worlds continue to exist. If the Apache way of life was destroyed completely, what meaning would his choice have? "I have to do something," he told Sarah as reports of unrest on the reservation reached them. These policies will destroy my people not by killing their bodies but by killing their spirits. What can you do? You have no official position, no political power. I have something better than political power. I have proof that another way is possible. What Running Wolf did was both simple and revolutionary. He began inviting Apache families to visit his ranch, not just for water or business, but for cultural exchange. He asked Singing Bird and other elders to share stories and songs with his neighbors' children. He organized gatherings where Apache artisans could sell their work directly to white buyers, bypassing the corrupt trading systems that kept most Apache families in poverty. Most importantly, he used his growing influence in the territorial government to advocate for policies that would preserve Apache culture while encouraging economic development. He wrote letters to newspapers, spoke at public meetings, and gradually built a coalition of voices calling for a more humane approach to Indian affairs. The strength of America, he said in a speech that was reprinted in newspapers across the territory, comes not from making all people the same, but from allowing different peoples to contribute their unique gifts to the common good. To destroy Apache culture is to rob America of wisdom that took thousands of years to develop. Sarah supported her husband's advocacy work, but she also pursued her own form of activism. She established a school on their ranch that served children from multiple communities. Apache, Mexican, white, and mixed heritage families could all send their children to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and practical skills like farming and animal husbandry. The school was controversial, opposed by some whites who did not want their children educated alongside Apache children, and by some Apache who feared it was another attempt at forced assimilation. But it succeeded because it addressed a real need that the official school system was not meeting. Children learn faster when they learn together, Sarah wrote in a report she submitted to the Territorial Education Board. They also learn tolerance, cooperation, and the skills they will need to live in a territory where different peoples must work together. By their 5th anniversary, Running Wolf and Sarah had become recognized leaders in the territory, sought out for advice on everything from water rights to education policy. Their ranch had evolved from a simple cattle operation into a model of what successful integration might look like. They had 3 children by then: Thomas, their oldest, who showed signs of inheriting his father's gift for languages and his mother's head for business; Maria, named for Running Wolf's Apache grandmother, who seemed equally comfortable in moccasins or European shoes; and baby Daniel, named for his grandfather, who was just beginning to walk and explore the world that his parents were building for him. Each child faced unique challenges. Thomas, as the oldest, bore the burden of being the first mixed heritage child in many settings. He learned early to navigate between worlds, to be Apache enough for his Apache relatives and white enough for white society, all while developing his own sense of who he was. Maria, born into a family that was more established and accepted, had different challenges but also different opportunities. She grew up assuming that the world was a place where different kinds of people lived and worked together, where speaking multiple languages was normal, where her Apache grandmother's stories were just as important as her white grandfather's. Baby Daniel would grow up in a world that his parents' work had helped to create, a world where mixed marriages were still unusual but no longer scandalous, where the lines between communities were more fluid, where children could claim multiple heritages without being forced to choose between them. Daniel McKenna, watching his grandchildren grow up, sometimes marveled at how wrong his initial fears had been. He had worried that Sarah's marriage to Running Wolf would isolate her from the white community, would make her children outcasts, would destroy everything they had built together. Instead, the marriage had made Sarah a more prominent figure in the community, not less. Her children were among the most popular and successful students in the territory. The ranch had become one of the most prosperous and respected operations in the region. Most surprisingly to him, the marriage had strengthened rather than weakened Sarah's connection to her father. Instead of growing apart, they had grown closer, bound together by their shared pride in what Sarah and Running Wolf were accomplishing. "I was wrong about almost everything," McKenna admitted to his daughter on the evening of her 5th anniversary. "I thought marrying Running Wolf would diminish you, would limit your possibilities. Instead, it's opened up possibilities I never imagined." "You weren't wrong to be concerned," Sarah replied. "Love alone wouldn't have been enough. We had to prove that love could build something worthwhile, something that made both communities stronger." "And have you proved it?" Sarah looked out over the ranch where Apache and white children were playing together while their parents discussed business and politics in 3 different languages. She looked at her own children, healthy and confident and clearly beloved by adults from multiple communities. "I think we've proved that it's possible," she said. "Not easy, but possible. And maybe that's the most important thing, showing people that there's another way, that the choice isn't between separation and assimilation but between staying trapped in old patterns and creating new ones." The 6th year brought new challenges as territorial politics became increasingly heated. Arizona was moving toward statehood, and the debates over the new state constitution raised fundamental questions about citizenship, voting rights, and the legal status of Apache people. Running Wolf found himself drawn into these debates, not because he sought political power but because he had become one of the few voices that both Apache and white communities trusted. His success as a businessman, his service to the community during the drought, and his advocacy for practical solutions to complex problems had earned him a reputation as someone who could bridge the gap between competing interests. "You should run for the Territorial Council," urged Sheriff Martinez, now one of Running Wolf's closest friends. "You've got more practical experience than most of the men who claim to represent this region." "Apache cannot vote for Territorial Council," Running Wolf replied. "How can I represent people who have no legal voice?" "That's exactly why you should run. You can be the voice they don't have." The campaign that followed was unlike anything the territory had seen before. Running Wolf ran on a platform that emphasized economic development, educational opportunity, and legal equality for all residents of the territory regardless of ethnicity or tribal affiliation. His opponents tried to use his heritage against him, arguing that an Apache could not truly represent white interests. But those arguments fell flat when confronted with Running Wolf's record of service to the entire community. More challenging were the criticisms from some Apache leaders who argued that participation in territorial politics was another form of surrender to white authority, that Running Wolf was legitimizing a system designed to destroy Apache sovereignty. "I am not surrendering to white authority," Running Wolf replied at a gathering on the reservation. "I am claiming Apache authority in white institutions. I am saying that Apache wisdom, Apache values, Apache interests deserve representation in the government that makes decisions about our lives." The election was close, but Running Wolf won, becoming the first Apache member of the Arizona Territorial Council. His victory was celebrated by supporters from across the political and ethnic spectrum, but it also marked the beginning of a new phase in his relationship with both communities. Political success brought new responsibilities and new pressures. As a council member, Running Wolf had to balance the competing interests of his various constituencies while maintaining his integrity and his commitment to the principles that had guided his rise to prominence. His first major legislative success was a bill requiring territorial schools to offer instruction in both English and Spanish, with provisions for Apache language instruction in districts with significant Apache populations. The bill was controversial, opposed by those who believed that American citizenship required abandoning all other languages, but it passed due to Running Wolf's patient work building coalitions with Mexican American and progressive white legislators. "Language is not just words," Running Wolf explained in his floor speech supporting the bill. "Language is a way of thinking, a way of understanding the world. When we destroy someone's language, we destroy their ability to contribute their unique perspective to our common understanding. Arizona will be stronger, not weaker, when all our children can speak the languages of all our peoples." The bill's passage marked a turning point in territorial politics, the beginning of a more inclusive approach to education and citizenship that would influence the eventual state constitution. But political success also created new tensions in Running Wolf's marriage. The demands of political life meant long absences from the ranch, missed family dinners, and a level of public scrutiny that affected not just him but Sarah and their children as well. "I married a rancher and businessman," Sarah said during one of their rare quiet evenings together. "Now I'm married to a politician. I'm not sure I like the change. I am still the same man." "Are you?" The Running Wolf I married made decisions based on what was right for his family and his community. The politician Running Wolf makes decisions based on what's possible in the legislature, what compromises can be achieved, what deals can be struck. It was a fair criticism, one that Running Wolf had been struggling with himself. Political success required a kind of flexibility that sometimes conflicted with the moral clarity that had guided his earlier choices. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "I want you to remember that changing the law is just the first step. The real work happens in places like this ranch, in schools like the one we built, in the daily choices people make about how to treat each other. Don't become so focused on political victories that you forget about the human victories that matter more." Sarah's words reminded Running Wolf of something his grandmother had told him years before: power that serves itself grows weak. Power that serves others grows strong. Political office was only valuable if it allowed him to serve the vision that he and Sarah had been building together, a vision of a community where different peoples could live and work together with mutual respect and benefit. The 7th year of their marriage brought a crisis that tested all of Running Wolf's political skills and personal relationships. Geronimo, the legendary Apache war leader who had been held prisoner in Florida since his surrender, died in captivity. His death sparked renewed unrest on the reservation and calls for vengeance against the white government that had imprisoned him. Some young Apache men began talking about leaving the reservation to resume the old ways of warfare. Other Apache leaders counseled patience and negotiation. The territorial government, fearing another outbreak of violence, began restricting movement and imposing martial law conditions on the reservation. Running Wolf found himself in an impossible position. As an elected official, he was expected to support government policy and help maintain order. As an Apache, he was expected to honor Geronimo's memory and support his people's anger against their oppressors. "Which side will you choose?" demanded James Harrison, the territorial governor, when Running Wolf requested a meeting to discuss the crisis. "I do not choose sides," Running Wolf replied. "I choose solutions. Your policies are creating the very problems they claim to prevent. Treating all Apache as potential enemies makes enemies out of people who want to be allies. And what would you suggest?" "I suggest we honor Geronimo's memory by proving that his people can find justice through law instead of through war. I suggest we address the real grievances that fuel anger to poverty, lack of opportunity, disrespect for Apache dignity, instead of just punishing the symptoms." What followed was a month of intense negotiation, with Running Wolf serving as mediator between government officials, military commanders, and Apache leaders. Drawing on his relationships in all communities, he was able to craft agreements that addressed immediate security concerns while also establishing long-term reforms in reservation policy. The agreements included provisions for economic development projects that would create jobs on the reservation, educational programs that would prepare young Apache for success in both traditional and modern occupations, and legal reforms that would give Apache families more control over their own affairs. Most importantly, the agreements established a formal role for Apache leaders in territorial government, creating advisory positions that would ensure Apache voices were heard in policy decisions that affected their communities. "This is not the end," Running Wolf told the Apache leaders who had worked with him on the negotiations. "This is the beginning. We have opened a door that has been closed for too long. Now we must walk through it and prove that Apache people can be partners in building the future of this land." The successful resolution of the Geronimo crisis made Running Wolf a national figure, featured in newspaper articles and magazine profiles across the country. But success also brought new pressures and new enemies. Some white politicians resented his growing influence and began looking for ways to undermine his credibility. Some Apache traditionalists accused him of selling out his people's interests for personal advancement. Some Mexican-American leaders worried that his success was coming at the expense of their own political aspirations. Most challenging of all were the expectations that came with national attention. Running Wolf found himself invited to speak at universities, to consult with government officials in Washington, to serve on committees dealing with Indian affairs across the Western Territories. Each opportunity was flattering and potentially valuable, but each also pulled him further from the ranch, the family, and the community work that had been the foundation of his success. It was Sarah who helped him find his way through the maze of competing demands and opportunities. "What made you strong enough to do all this?" she asked during one of their evening conversations. "What gave you the wisdom to solve problems that had stumped territorial governors and military commanders?" "I learned to see problems from multiple perspectives," Running Wolf replied. "I learned to understand what each side needed, what they feared, what they hoped for. And where did you learn that? Running Wolf considered the question. I learned it here, on this ranch, building this family, working with these neighbors. I learned it by living it, not by studying it. Then, maybe the answer to all these invitations and opportunities is simple. Maybe you serve the country best by continuing to build something real here, something people can see and touch and learn from. It was wise advice, the kind of wisdom that comes from understanding the difference between influence and impact, between celebrity and leadership. Running Wolf gradually learned to decline most of the opportunities that would take him away from home, focusing instead on using his position to support the kind of grassroots work that had made him effective in the first place. By their 8th anniversary, Running Wolf and Sarah had created something unique in the American West: a family, a business, and a way of life that proved it was possible for people of different backgrounds to build something together that was stronger than what any of them could have built alone. Their ranch employed workers from multiple ethnic backgrounds, their children attended school with children from diverse families, and their business dealings extended throughout the territory and into Mexico and California. More importantly, they had helped create a community where the old divisions were slowly giving way to new forms of cooperation and mutual respect. It was not a perfect community. Prejudice and fear still existed, conflicts still arose, and some people still chose separation over integration. But it was a community where change was possible, where children could imagine futures different from their parents' pasts, where the American promise of equality and opportunity had a chance to become reality for all people, not just for some. "We have built a bridge," Running Wolf said to Sarah as they watched their children playing with neighbors' children in the warm evening light. "Not just between Apache and white, but between past and future. Our children will cross that bridge into a world where what matters is not what blood runs in their veins but what dreams live in their hearts." Sarah took her husband's hand and smiled. "And they'll build bridges of their own, bridges we can't even imagine yet. That's what love does, it creates possibilities that didn't exist before." As the sun set over the Arizona territory, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, Running Wolf and Sarah stood together on the porch of the home they had built, watching their children play in a world they were helping to create. It was a world where an Apache man and a white woman could find love and build a life together. It was a world where their children could claim multiple heritages without shame or apology. It was a world where strength came not from dominating others but from finding ways to work together. Most importantly, it was a world that proved the truth Running Wolf had discovered in his quest for love, that the man who destroys his weak self, his fearful, limited, prejudiced self, can never be destroyed by others. Such a man becomes a force for possibility, a creator of new realities, a bridge between what was and what could be. And, in the end, that was their greatest gift to the territory and to the generations that would follow, the proof that another way was possible, that love could indeed conquer fear, that hope could triumph over hatred, and that the courage to be vulnerable in the service of something larger than oneself was the strongest force in the world. 20 years had passed since Running Wolf first stood on my porch and spoke those words that changed everything: "I wish for love." Now, in the spring of 1907, I sat on that same porch, older and grayer but still privileged to witness the fruits of the choice he had made and the courage both he and Sarah had shown. The Arizona Territory was preparing for statehood, and the debates about the new state constitution were being shaped by principles that Running Wolf had spent decades advocating. The question was no longer whether people of different backgrounds could live together successfully, but how to structure laws and institutions to support that success. Running Wolf himself, now in his early 50s, had become one of the most respected political leaders in the territory. His hair showed streaks of silver, and lines around his eyes spoke of years spent squinting into the desert sun and wrestling with complex problems. But his voice still carried the same thoughtful authority that had impressed me all those years ago, and his commitment to building bridges between communities had never wavered. Sarah, at 45, had grown into a formidable leader in her own right. The school she had established on their ranch had become a model that was being replicated throughout the territory. Her advocacy for women's education and economic opportunities had helped change territorial laws regarding women's property rights and business ownership. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles for national magazines, and corresponded with educators and reformers across the country. Their children had grown into remarkable young adults, each carrying forward their parents' legacy in their own way while also charting new territories of possibility. Thomas, now 18, had been accepted to both Harvard University and the University of California, but he had chosen instead to stay in Arizona to help establish the territory's first teacher training college. His vision was to create an institution that would prepare educators to serve the diverse communities of the emerging state, teachers who could work effectively with students from multiple cultural backgrounds. Education is the real frontier now, Thomas told me during one of his visits to my ranch. We've got more land than we know what to do with, but we're still figuring out how to help all our people develop their potential. That's the work that matters most. Maria, at 16, had inherited her mother's business acumen and her father's gift for languages. She could conduct negotiations in English, Spanish, and Apache, and she had already started her own small enterprise buying traditional crafts from Apache artisans and selling them to collectors in eastern cities. Her business was not just profitable, it was helping to preserve and promote Apache artistic traditions while providing economic opportunities for reservation families. I want to show people that Apache culture is not just something to be preserved in museums, Maria explained. It's something alive and valuable that can contribute to the modern world. Every piece of pottery or beadwork that sells in New York or Boston is proof that Apache knowledge and skills have worth in the wider economy. Young Daniel, at 14, was showing signs of inheriting his father's interest in politics and law. He had already organized student government at the territorial school and had written essays about constitutional law that impressed his teachers with their sophisticated understanding of legal principles and democratic theory. I want to be a lawyer, Daniel told me with the confidence of youth. But not just any lawyer. I want to be the kind of lawyer who helps people understand their rights and helps communities solve problems peacefully. I want to use the law to build things, not just to tear things down. Each of the children faced challenges that their parents had never encountered. Thomas dealt with subtle forms of discrimination at the university level, where some professors questioned whether someone of mixed heritage could truly understand American values. Maria navigated the complex world of art and commerce, where she had to prove repeatedly that her business success was based on merit, not novelty. Daniel wrestled with questions about his own identity and ambitions, wondering how to honor his multiple heritages while also making his own mark on the world. But they also had advantages their parents had never enjoyed. They had grown up in a family that expected success, in a community that knew such success was possible, in a territory where mixed marriages and multicultural families were no longer shocking novelties but accepted parts of the social fabric. The ranch itself had evolved far beyond anything Running Wolf and Sarah had originally envisioned. What had started as a simple cattle operation had become a complex enterprise including livestock, agriculture, a guest lodge for visitors from around the country, and a conference center where territorial leaders gathered to discuss policy issues. The guest lodge was particularly significant, as it had become a place where people from different backgrounds could meet in neutral territory to work out their differences. Mexican ranchers negotiated water rights with Apache farmers. White businessmen partnered with Hispanic entrepreneurs. Territorial politicians hammered out legislation with input from constituents who represented the full diversity of Arizona's population. This place has become what we always hoped it could become, Sarah told me as we walked through the lodge one afternoon, past conference rooms where animated discussions were taking place in multiple languages. It's become a place where the artificial divisions that keep people apart can be dissolved through actual conversation and shared work. But the success had not come without costs. Running Wolf's prominence as a political leader had made him a target for those who resented the changes he represented. Death threats were not uncommon, and there had been several attempts to sabotage ranch operations or intimidate the family into leaving the territory. More subtly, success had brought pressures that strained even the strongest relationships. Running Wolf's political responsibilities often kept him away from home for months at a time. Sarah's own advocacy work had grown to national prominence, bringing invitations to speak and consult that could easily have consumed all her time and energy. The challenge was maintaining the human connections and family bonds that had been the foundation of their success while also meeting the growing demands of their public roles. Sometimes I feel like we're in danger of becoming symbols instead of people, Sarah confided during one of our conversations. People want us to represent the solution to every problem, to be proof that all conflicts can be resolved through goodwill and hard work. That's a lot of pressure to carry. Do you ever regret the path you chose? I asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the ranch where Apache and white and Mexican workers were collaborating on the spring roundup, where her children were growing up confident in their ability to move between worlds, where something genuinely new was being built from the materials of the old. No, she said finally. But I understand now that choosing love is just the beginning. Living love, building something real from it, proving that it can work in the practical world, that's the work of a lifetime. And it's work that never ends. The Territorial Constitutional Convention of 1907 provided a dramatic stage for demonstrating how much had changed in Arizona since Running Wolf and Sarah's courtship 20 years earlier. Running Wolf served as one of the convention delegates, helping to draft language that would protect the rights of all citizens regardless of ethnicity while also establishing mechanisms for resolving conflicts between different communities. The debates were intense, with some delegates arguing for provisions that would limit political participation to native-born Americans, others pushing for language that would protect traditional Hispanic land grants, and still others advocating for tribal sovereignty within the framework of state law. Running Wolf found himself serving as a mediator between competing factions, drawing on 2 decades of experience in building practical compromises that served everyone's essential interests while requiring everyone to give up something they might have preferred. The strength of our new state, he argued in one of his most memorable convention speeches, will come not from making all our people the same, but from creating institutions that allow all our people to contribute their unique gifts to the common good. We are not trying to build a state for Apache people or for white people or for Hispanic people. We are trying to build a state for American people, all of us who have chosen to make our lives and our futures here in this land. The constitutional language that emerged from the convention reflected Running Wolf's influence, establishing Arizona as a state with some of the most progressive provisions in the nation regarding education, voting rights, and economic opportunity. It was not perfect, no constitution ever is, but it represented a genuine attempt to create legal structures that could support the kind of multicultural democracy that was emerging in the territory. The ratification campaign that followed was hard-fought, with opponents arguing that the proposed constitution was too radical, too accommodating to foreign influences, too willing to grant equality to people who had not earned it through proper assimilation. But the campaign also demonstrated how much public opinion had shifted. Towns across the territory organized rallies in support of the Constitution, with speakers representing multiple communities arguing that Arizona's diversity was a strength, not a weakness. Sarah played a particularly important role in the ratification campaign, organizing women's groups to support the Constitution even though women would not yet have the right to vote under its provisions. Her argument was that women had a vital stake in the kind of society the Constitution would create, and that their voices deserved to be heard even if they could not yet be counted at the ballot box. This Constitution represents our children's future, she told audiences across the territory. It represents the world we are building for them, the opportunities they will have, the rights they will enjoy. We may not be able to vote on it today, but we can certainly work to ensure it passes, and we can begin planning for the day when we will be full participants in the democracy it creates. The Constitution was ratified by a wide margin, and Arizona was admitted to the Union as the 48th state on February 14, 1912, Valentine's Day, a detail that Sarah noted with amusement as proof that love really could conquer political obstacles. By then, Running Wolf and Sarah's children were beginning their own adult lives and careers, carrying forward their parents' legacy while also making their own contributions to the emerging state. Thomas had established his teacher training college and was developing innovative curricula that prepared educators to work effectively in multicultural settings. His students went on to teach in schools throughout the Southwest, spreading methods and attitudes that helped make education more accessible and relevant to children from all backgrounds. Maria had expanded her business into a network of trading posts and retail outlets that connected Native American artisans with national markets while also providing employment and economic development opportunities for reservation communities. Her success had inspired other young Native entrepreneurs and had helped change perceptions about the economic potential of tribal enterprises. Daniel had been accepted to law school and was already planning a career that would focus on constitutional law and civil rights. His goal was to use legal advocacy to continue the work his parents had begun, ensuring that the principles embedded in Arizona's Constitution would be enforced and expanded rather than ignored or undermined. Each of the children had also married and was starting families of their own, creating a new generation that would grow up taking for granted the possibilities their grandparents had fought to create. Thomas married Elena Rodriguez, a teacher whose family had been in Arizona since before it was part of the United States. Their wedding was a celebration that brought together Apache, Mexican, and white communities, a festive demonstration of how much the social landscape had changed. Maria married James Patterson, a mining engineer whose family had come west from Pennsylvania during the territorial period. Their courtship had been smooth and uncontroversial, a sign of how much more accepted mixed relationships had become. Daniel was engaged to Rebecca Morrison, whose grandfather had been one of the white ranchers who had initially opposed Running Wolf's marriage to Sarah. The engagement represented not just personal happiness but also symbolic reconciliation between families that had once been on opposite sides of the territory's cultural divide. As I watched these young people build their own lives and relationships, I was struck by how normal it all seemed. What had required enormous courage and determination for Running Wolf and Sarah had become simply part of the fabric of life for their children. The bridges their parents had built were now just part of the landscape, used daily by people who no longer thought about them as remarkable achievements. But I also understood that this